what is constitution. I think these things have also been dealt with. So yeah, I will deal with these things. But today I will just start with federalism and the idea of federation, confederation, all these things, relative advantages, disadvantages. You might have studied these, I'm guessing, already in political science as well. But then constitutional law is a subject, or constitutional law is not merely a, constitution is not merely a legal document, it's as much a political document. So you have to study these things in many different disciplines. So yes, you might have studied all these things. For example, I'm guessing like in political science. So for example, when John Austin, if at all he was taught to you guys and his idea of sovereign was discussed in political science, your teacher might have told you about his idea of sovereignty and how it is difficult to fit his idea of sovereignty into a federal form of government. So I'm guessing, I'm just making wild guesses here. So I'm guessing that these things might have been discussed already in the earlier classes. And coming to the comparative aspect of it, comparative aspect, by that I mean I think part of your syllabus also talks about what federalism is like in the United States of America, Australia, Canada. I think you guys are a little introduced to the United States model because I think I dealt with that in the CLS classes. And Australia and Canada, I will do that, no issues. These are quite easy to compare. Australia as well as Canada. But then you have many other interesting, very interesting, federal forms of government around the world that if you guys have an interest, you guys can have a look at them as well. So for example, you might have heard a lot about Spain, especially their Basque and Catalonia autonomous provinces. Then you might have heard a lot about Belgium as well, because Belgium has a French-speaking population as well as German-speaking population. So there are also demands of Belgium. Then again, is a case of federal form of government, but there were also demands for more autonomy to secession as well. And then you might have heard about Germany as well. That's also a good case of federalism or federal form of government. Then of course Switzerland. Then very close to you, you have Malaysia, and then in Africa you have Nigeria. So you have many different examples of federal forms of government. So in each of these different federal forms of government, I mean, in these different states, okay, nation states, you will have different manifestations of this idea of federal form of government. So it's always very interesting, even if it is not part of your syllabus, but given that you have chosen constitutional law as a specialization subject, it's always good for you to probably go back and have a look at all these other models that are available to you. So yes, that's what I will confine myself. Don't worry, I will not overburden you guys with taking all these other cases as well. I will only take Canada. Canada is a very easy example. Then US, you guys know already, and then of course the case of Australia. These two have been referred to in many judgments as well of the Supreme Court. So they're always interesting cases for us to study. So yes, that's what I am hoping to essentially deal with. Okay. Now for the introductory part, the basic introductory part, I have shared with you guys a link to a particular reading. Okay. The reading is on federalism. Okay. What federalism is essentially all about, what are the relative advantages and disadvantages of federalism. Then what are the relative advantages and disadvantages of federalism, and then along with that we'll look into how the whole thing plays out when it comes to legislative relations, then administrative relations, and then of course fiscal relation. We can look into all that, okay. And we can also look at how the devolution of power essentially happens between the center and the states, okay, whether it's through, of course, it's almost in all cases, okay, as long as it is a case of federalism, there will definitely be a constitution, okay. Whether it's a coming together of federalism or holding together of federalism, doesn't matter. You always need a sanctimonious document, a document that has higher sanctity than the constitutive units, to basically determine the relation between the center or the federation versus the states, or provinces, whatever you may call. You have different names in different cases. So yeah, so we will look into all that, okay. So today, essentially, I'm going to deal with this basic idea of federalism, okay, what this is all about. So I have shared with you guys a reading, as I was telling you guys, that will deal with all these things, okay. So it starts with federalism, then as I was telling you guys, how the distribution of power. So when you talk about distribution of power, we essentially talk about legislative distribution of power happens, and along with that, other administrative functions, whether even judicial functions, whether they are distributed or not, we can look into all that. Then you have something very essential, although frowned upon in our country as of now, the idea of asymmetric federalism, whether it's a good or bad thing. Why is it a good or bad thing is something that you guys can look into. So all these things we will look into, okay. So today let's start with this basic topic of introductory topic of federalism. I will go into constitutionalism later. I guess you guys have read them, studied them many times. So some other day I will take those into consideration and discuss here in the class, okay. So what essentially is is federalism? So you will find some good definitions, given by different thinkers. One of the most important, definition that we refer to is by Professor K.C. Weir, okay, who said that, where there is a single independent authority for the whole area in respect of some matters, there are independent regional authorities for other matters. So essentially what happens is that there are governance at two different levels, okay. So if you remember, when Montesquieu talks about separation of power, he talks about horizontal separation of power, in the sense that he talks about division of powers of the government into three separate branches, but those are at the same level, isn't it? I mean, at the same level, be it at the central or at the state provincial level. The kind of division of power that he's talking about is horizontal, in the sense that at the same level of governance you have three separate branches of governance: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Okay, so that's known as horizontal separation of power. Now there is another kind of separation of power, okay, whether you want to call it separation of power or not, but we use the term called vertical separation of power, okay, or vertical division of power, you can say. Now, why do we call it vertical? Because you have two different levels here. Okay, let's start with two different levels because it goes further, as you guys already are aware of. Okay. Now, the basic idea is, can be described at the two different levels. Now, why is it vertical? Because there is a hierarchy in the kind of power, division of power that we are talking about. So you have at the higher level, the central, or the federal, or the national government. You have many different terms, okay? And then below that you have state, regional, or provincial, government, okay? So it's essentially a case of, a mechanism of, division of power, okay, between two different levels of government, okay? So that's essentially what federalism is all about, okay. So you guys can also refer to D.D. Basu's definition of federalism, okay, he doesn't say anything else. He says more or less the same thing. He says that federalism constitutes a complex governmental mechanism for governance of a country. So he starts with how it's a complex mechanism for governance in a particular country. Okay. Further, he says that it has been evolved to bind into one political union. It has been evolved to bind into one political union several autonomous, distinct, separate, and disparate political entities or administrative units. So you have many different separate, disparate political or administrative units. You bind them into one. Okay. So that's essentially how federalism has come into existence. Now you probably have understood what he is essentially referring to, the kind of definition that he has given so far. Okay, given the kind of language that he has used, that it has been evolved, okay, it hasn't automatically evolved, it has been evolved into one political union, several autonomous, distinct, separate, disparate political entities. Okay, now which country must he be referring to? Definitely not the case of India, as you know, because in case of India, we say that even if you look at the history, it's not a case of where autonomous constituent parts came together to form a federative whole. That's not the case in the case of India. So he's definitely referring to the case of United States of America, especially after they adopted their constitution in the year 1787. Okay, so that's the model that the book. I have a copy of this book. Okay, so I don't know if this is there. I will share this with you as well. I will scan and send to you. So yeah, he's definitely referring to the United States model. Okay. So federalism is a constitutional mechanism for dividing power. In the reading that I have sent you, there it is defined like this, that federalism is a constitutional mechanism for dividing power between the levels of government so that federated units can enjoy substantial constitutionally guaranteed autonomy over certain policy areas while sharing power in accordance with agreed rules over others. So here what they're emphasizing on is the autonomy of the regional units. Okay, so they come together, okay, and they share certain powers, okay, with the center, but on certain other matters they retain their autonomy. Okay, so you have self-government and you also have shared government. Okay, on certain matters you have self-government, on other matters you have shared government. Okay, government. Okay, now how do they do that? Okay, for introduction's sake, for merely introduction's sake, essentially what happens is that, as you will know, okay, matters which are of local concern, okay, matters which are of local concern, things that bother you at your local level, okay, will basically be left for self-governance, and things which are of either mutual as well as international concern will be left to the shared government, that is at the federal level. Okay, so certain examples. So we have already discussed this, if you remember, when we studied seventh schedule. Okay, so we have already discussed how the kind of powers were in the three different lists. Okay, and we also discussed how those three different lists are to be interpreted. We already discussed, and different principles of interpretation also have been discussed in the, I think, semester before last semester. Okay, so if you remember all those, okay, if you remember the kind of ways in which power had been distributed between the center and the states, you will essentially see, broadly we can say that, so for example, healthcare, local transport, then other matters of local concern, for example, land, etc., law and order, all these matters are of local concern. These can only be dealt with locally at the local level. Okay, all these matters have been left with the local government. And usually that's the case elsewhere as well. Okay, so things which are of local concern, okay, are usually left with the local government, that is with the at the provincial or state level. Okay, and then things which are of shared concern or national concern or even international concern, because these group of entities also deal with other nation states. Okay, so things that matter at that level are also are at that level. Okay, so for example, what will be those matters? So for example, so you have defense. Okay, that will be with the central level. Then you have, for example, international, foreign relations. Okay, those will be at the international level. And then I said the things which are also of mutual concern. Okay, so quite often rivers. Okay, those come under come at the central level. Okay, but then this also on certain matters. Okay, come at the state level. But then you also have other things like, for example, interstate travel. Okay, in interstate transport, those matters are of shared concern. Okay, so those matters are quite often left with the center, because the center will be better placed, more efficient in dealing with all these matters. Okay, so federalism is essentially based on this idea that on certain matters which are of local concern, okay, those things will be dealt with at the local level. That essentially what has been referred here to as the case of self-governance. And there are other matters which are of shared concern as well as of international concern is also again a kind of shared concern. All those matters are placed in the hands of the national, federal, or union government. Okay, so that's essentially what federalism is all about. Now, let me take this a little further. Okay, what basically federalism could mean. Okay, now there is a very good relationship between federalism on the one hand and democracy and republicanism. Okay, republicanism, when I'm using the word republicanism, I'm using it in the sense, in a very interesting sense, in the sense that where you have limited governance, where you have constitutionalism. Okay, so federalism goes well with these ideas. Okay, if there is no democracy, then federalism makes no sense. Okay, if there is no republicanism, federalism becomes less effective. Federalism, in fact, protects republican forms of government. Along with that, federalism also promotes constitutionalism. Constitutionalism, if you understand the term in terms of limited governance, government, in the sense that a government which is limited by the law. We already discussed the theoretical aspect of it in jurisprudence, as well as in, you must have been taught in either political science or constitutional law classes earlier. So anyway, so what I was saying is that federalism as an idea has a very close-knit relation with these other ideas like democracy, republicanism to the extent that it is related to also constitutionalism and the idea of limited government. Okay, so these are very connected topics. Okay, now the thing is that so if you relate the idea of federalism is with all these ideas, then you do not have to restrict the idea of federalism only to this two-tier form of government. It can also be extended further. So you know that wherein the nation states are too big, okay, even the regional governments or provincial governments are not efficient enough to administer certain other sub-local matters. So you have even below that certain local governments. Okay, so for example, in our case, the 73rd and 74th Amendment had created another tier of government. Okay, so that's there. Okay, now you can further extend it. Okay, that is also possible. Okay, not like if you relate it with those other ideas I told you. Okay, because federalism is essentially about empowering people. Okay, people we just break down the group of people. At the national level, you have a huge group of people. At the state level, you have another group of people. At the local level, you have another group of people. What's the next level of governance? Okay, that will be your family. Okay, and then of course it is extended to the idea of individual. Okay, and individuals are provided certain protections under the constitution. Okay, so federalism can also be extended to 5 tier of governance. Okay, if you, and this, there are papers written on this. I'm not just telling you nonsense here. There are papers written on this that you will come across. Okay, so essentially the idea is to increase democracy, to protect rights of smaller and smaller groups of individuals. Okay, that's why you have republicanism as well as limited government and all those ideas. So it can also be extended to those extents. However, here in this subject, we will not take it to those extremes. We will just concern ourselves with what the syllabus is talking about. But just so that you guys know that federalism could also be understood to mean all those other aspects as well. So you start with the central, national, or federal government. Then you have governance at the regional level. Then you have local governments, so for example, panchayats, municipalities. And then you have family, which is also quite often understood as another level of governance. But then the governance not in the, of course, it's not in that we are to understand family not in terms of a patriarchal institution, but a democratic institution where everyone participates. And then of course you have individual. Okay, so anyway, these are the different ways in which federalism can be understood in modern times. However, in the traditional sense of the term, and to the extent that this syllabus allows, we will only be dealing with them at the central and provincial level. Okay, so I hope you guys understood what I'm essentially talking about. Am I audible to you guys? If there are any issues, yes, you guys can. Okay. Okay. Others, I'm only hearing one voice. Others, you guys can also type if you're uncomfortable speaking. You guys can also type yes or no. I will respond accordingly.
Yes, sir.
Okay then. Fine then. So yes, as I told you, you have so the most important model for federalism that we have as of now, the model that we take to define what federalism is essentially all about, is the United States model. Because prior to that, we do not have any case of federal form of government. You might have had loose confederations. If you go back to Greco-Roman times, you had certain kind of federative units even then who would come together and live together. Okay, so you had, but they were never of the kind of federal form of government that we see today. Okay, so the definition of federalism that I was trying to explain to you from, for example, Casey Weir's perspective or D.D. Basu's perspective, those are essentially based on the United States model. So the difficulty quite often arises when we try to define, for example, our own form of government. What kind of form of government is it? In certain cases, it has been said that it is of federal form of government. In others, it has been said that it is a quasi-federal form of government. Then in Keshavananda Bharati's case, a constitutional bench says that it's a basic structure of the constitution. And then subsequently again, that idea has been diluted by other judges, for example, Justice Iyer. So you come across, so essentially what happens is that everyone has their own perspective and understanding of what Indian model is. I'm not going into details of Indian model as yet, but just that, because the definition of federalism quite often has been, basically, the idea of federalism has been taken from the US model. So you might have certain other models out there, that do not fit into the US model, and hence you have these other names, okay, like quasi federations, okay, quasi federal forms of government. Okay, so you have many of that kind. Okay, you have of course, India, and you have Pakistan next to us, okay, and then you have Malaysia next to us, and then you have many other countries, okay, Germany, Canada, and then you have Australia, Argentina, Belgium. No, Australia would be a more proper federation of the kind United States is, but not Canada, because we have followed Canadian model. So Canada would come in the kind of quasi federations. Then you have Belgium, Argentina, etc., etc. Okay. So we will look at them. Okay. Otherwise, these are more or less all different kinds of federation. But if you take United States to be model, then you have to then call some of them quasi federations, some others like proper federations. Okay. So yes, this is what federalism is essentially all about. I'm going to discuss about certain other terms just for the introduction's sake now. Okay, you will come across another term called confederation. Okay, I'm going to deal with that in a different lecture later on. Okay, so now that we have discussed what federalism is, we will also come across words like federation and confederation. Okay, now federation will be a nation state where they follow federal forms of government. Okay, federal forms of government. Now, federal forms of government has certain features that we will discuss later on. Okay, but one of the most important feature of a federal form of government is a document. Okay, a document which has higher sanctity. Okay, higher sanctity. And that would be the constitution. Okay, so in all federal form of government, okay, whether they call them federation or not, okay, in all federal form of government, okay, you will have a higher document. So constitution is essential because that will lay down the terms and conditions of integration. Okay, how powers will be shared from the center and the state level. Okay. So powers of the states are derived from that constitution. Power of the center is also derived from the constitution. And then you may also have constitution at the local level, or you may not have constitution at the local level. But then that supreme document, which has sanctity over both the center and the states, is essential. Whereas in the case of confederation, such document is not necessary. Such document is not there. Okay, you may have treaty, agreements between certain number of independent sovereign states that on these matters we will come together and deal with in a common way. So those will be case of confederations. Now the best example for that will be the United States of America, not the current United States of America. United States of America prior to 1787. You remember, before they had their constitution adopted, before that they had articles of confederation. So those individual states formed a loose compact to deal with certain matters. Okay, so if you have such kind of association, then those will be considered as confederations. Okay, now another example that comes to my mind will be the case of West Indies. Okay, now I don't know what to call them. Okay, why? Because that there is no country called West Indies. There's a West Indian cricket team, but it's basically many different sovereign states. Okay, now West Indies has evolved over a long period of time. Okay, there was a time when you could call them kind of federation of the way that we know, but then with time there was devolution of power. They almost became individual sovereign states, and now in some matters they share power, in some others they do not. So we probably should not call them a confederation. I do not have good examples of confederation as of now, but you definitely had confederations earlier. Another interesting example will be of that of European Union. Okay, what would be the case of European Union? Are they federation or are they confederation? Can I have some response here? Whatever you think, based on how I tried to define, where will you put them? The European Union. Are they federation? Yes.
Sir, I guess
Confederation.
it's confederation.
Okay. Yeah. Others?
It's a confederation piece.
Others? Okay, so here's the problem. Okay, we do not have only these options. There are other possible associations also. Okay, so the thing is, they definitely do not consider themselves as federation, because there are many nationalistic sentiments. Forget about at the European level. There are even within those states that you have. For example, most well about this Belgium and Spain. Okay. So in Spain, the Basque province, in their Catalonia, all these provinces have like nationalistic fervor in them. Okay, so forget about at the European level, within at the national level as well. Okay, you see that no, it's not a case of the kind of federation. Definitely not federation at the European level. Okay, then are they confederations? Oh, well, they're not even confederations, okay? Because their relationship is much more complicated than a loose association of a confederation, okay? So it's a very unique kind of relationship. So we neither call them a federation. One might choose to say, because these are not like, definitions, scientific definitions. People sometimes use these terms to refer to them, but then accepted idea is that they are neither a federation nor are they a confederation, because they are not loose enough to be called a confederation, nor are they integrated enough to be called a federation. Okay, so they are unique in their own ways. They are a union of a different kind. Okay, but then the choice is up to you. What do you want to call them? But it's probably better to put them in a kind of loose kind of federation than confederation, because they have certain common laws, okay, which affect individual citizens within the nation state, something that you do not see in confederation. So anyway, they do not call them federation, nor do they call themselves confederation. So I don't know what example to give you, okay, as of now, but in earlier times you definitely had many cases of confederations. The US prior to 1787 will be a case of confederation. So yes, these are the terms that we will deal with. One more thing that I want to introduce you guys to is federalism, the use of the term federalism and the use of the term federation. Okay, so there are many different possibilities. So see, India calls itself Union of States, Article 1. Okay, India or Bharat shall be a union of states. Okay, it doesn't refer to itself as federal form of government anywhere. So you may come across different terminologies, union or federation, you'll come across, but they might portray the same idea. Okay, so even though the term or word federalism or federation has not been used, other terms might also convey the same idea. So union here in case of India would mean more of a federal form of government than, for example, a unitary form of government that you might see in France or UK, or for that matter, our giant neighbor here, China. You might say that China has local provinces, they have devolved government, but those devolution of the power hasn't happened through constitution, but through ordinary exercise of legislative power, or for that matter, sometimes even executive power. Okay, so yes, what I was saying is that a country doesn't necessarily have to refer to itself as federal form of government for us to call it as federation. Okay, it may use other terminologies, but then when it comes to India, we do not call India a federation. We say that we have federal form of government. Okay, now see, there are other possible uses of these terms. Okay, whereas in case of United States or Australia, you can clearly, or Switzerland, okay, you can clearly use the words federation. Okay, you can with much more certainty and confidence, you can use the word confederation. Whereas, for example, in our case, we use the word federal form of government rather than say, or use the word federalism. Federalism is a basic structure. You can say something like that, but you never say that India is a federation. Okay, the reason we will come to them in the course of time. So anyway, so these are the terminologies I thought I will introduce you guys to. So just remember now that a federation is a more compact union, okay, and you necessarily have a document, okay, that determines the relation between center and the states. Whereas in case of confederation, it's a much looser union, okay, only on shared matters. For example, if there is a threat of external incursion, you share your, defense resources. Nothing else, no sharing of tax, no interstate trade, commerce, all those are secondary issues, okay. You might even have disputes when it comes to sharing river waters and all that, okay. So if you have such loose association, then you call it confederation, okay. Then you have other possibilities. So as I told you, European Union, which comes under neither of these heads, okay, they are of a different nature. Then you have cases of India in which you have federal form of government, but we neither call it confederation nor do we call it a federation. That's not a term which is in vogue when we come to referring to India. So yes, if this is clear, I will now proceed to certain, advantages and disadvantages associated with with the concept of federalism. I think for today I do not have much time. It's almost coming to an end. So I will now leave this up to you guys. So do you guys have any question at this stage? I would like to address them. Otherwise, in the next class, we will deal with certain advantages and disadvantages of federalism and federal forms of government. So you guys can unmute or you guys can type. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, then if you guys have any confusions, clarifications that need, you guys can ask me now. And do not worry about the materials. I will share them. I have already shared one. So go through that. I will share some more. Kindly go through them. So more than teaching the basics, as I told you, everything has been dealt with already. So for me, there's no point, going back to discussing legislative relation, executive relation, administrative relation, and all that. We have already dealt with principle of interpretation of those, lists. Okay, we have dealt with them. So I thought, let's take it further, and Himanshu can deal with them in much greater detail, and he will be much better capacitated and experienced to be able to deal with them in greater detail. So I will deal with all these matters. So at this stage, whatever we discussed today, if you have any confusion, any issues that I need to enlighten, focus on, then kindly tell me. You guys can unmute or you guys can type. No issues. No, nothing? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, so is it like only some students are there, rest are like taking nap?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So any confusion, say yes or no, then I will know that you guys are there. That's why I'm asking.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
So fine then. So in the next class, what I suggest is that in the reading that I suggested, go back and refer to the advantages and disadvantages of federal forms of government. Kindly go through that, and I will share other materials. Read them as well, and we will meet in the next class then. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
okay,
sir.
Thank you, sir.
No issues.